So we hear in all three readings today about the call for unification, the call for communion. We see Jesus with his apostles, and he said, come. They tell him all these great, wonderful things they've been doing. And obviously it was great and wonderful because they're exhausted and the people are still following them from place to place. But he's like, come, rest for a while. And the idea behind the resting there, it seems is that they're going to rejuvenate so that they continue to proclaim the good news of Jesus, the message of God. However, the people, they don't want to allow them time to do that. It's like outside forces that are coming together to not allow them to rejuvenate or to recuperate. And Jeremiah warns about it in the Old Testament today. He talks about the shepherds misleading the sheep. And that's first off, as an ordained deacon, that's kind of a scary thought that, as a shepherd, you don't want to mislead the sheep, right? But he's not just speaking to ordained clergy. He's speaking to all of us that are baptized. Because when we take our baptismal promises, we're promising to go forward and give the good news of Jesus Christ. And when we mislead someone, as Jeremiah says, woe to you, it's not good. However, I don't think it's an intentional misleading for the most part. Now, you get all sorts of outside forces, and we see them, and you talk about social media, and you talk about the television or the news or the radio, and there's a lot of information out there. And it's coming at us constantly, especially in the 21st century. It was coming at everyone constantly before when they were in 2,000 years ago. It was just in a different form. I mean, the people are beating the boat across the water to get there before Jesus. But we have all these outside forces, all this outside information, and it's constantly bombarding us. And what does it do to us? What does it do to us as individuals? What does it do to our psyche, to our emotional state, to our emotional health? Well, if it's negative stuff that's constantly bombarding us, and I'm not saying it's all negative, but if it's all negative and that's what we're consuming because that's what we're being hit with, it's kind of a bleak outlook. How can you be in communion with others when you're looking at it from a perspective of negativity? But yet that's exactly what Jesus is calling the apostles to do, is to teach others to come into communion with him and one another, to bring the sheep back into the sheepfold. So when we surround ourselves with negativity, when we allow the outside forces to overwhelm our senses, we're much like the apostles. And we need to go to a quiet place, and have rest. Because it's only in slowing down that we begin to hear the quiet whisper of God's voice. We hear, when he's calling the prophets throughout time, here I am. I come to do your will. But how can we hear the voice of God or allow the Spirit to work through us if we're constantly bombarding ourselves with outside information and outside noise? That was one of the things. We're celebrating the 500 year of and it's what we're calling it next door at Jesuit, of the cannonball experience of St. Ignatius. So it was 500 years ago that St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, was injured at Pamplona, and with the cannonball, it shattered his leg, and that's when he first had his conversion. And one of the things that he found, one of the things that he taught the early Jesuits, was to be still and to be silent and to see God and to experience God in all things. Ad majorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God. And it was in the silent walk, and it was in silent prayer, and it was in the spiritual exercises that they allowed themselves to be transformed, that we're all called to that transformation. Now, not all of us can make a 30-day silent retreat. Even if I could, I couldn't. I know better than that personally. 30 days, no thanks. Silence, no thanks. But we're all afforded that opportunity in some way to see God in all things. And when we start to have that communion with God and with one another, and we start to grow, we start to have that compassion. Jesus looked on the people with pity. He had compassion for them because they were like a sheep without a shepherd. How often if somebody approached you, whether it be family or friend, and they've had something they needed to tell you, and they tell you and you don't even hear it? You listen, kind of, but you're not hearing them. And what they really need is someone to be in communion with them in that moment. And I think that's all of us, because, I think my kids half the time now have figured out with Dad, if they want to do something, and I go, well, what are you talking about? Well, I told you yesterday. And it's like, then I don't question it, because, I don't know if I actually wasn't listening or not, which is not good. But I think they've figured that out. And that's not that I'm not listening, but that they can pull that, oh, I told you yesterday. But it's because we're not in the moment. And Jesus and the apostles were in the moment. He took them away to rest for a moment. And then he began to teach all those who came to him. He began to allow the Spirit to work through them through his teaching, which he calls each of us to do so each day. We're called to love and serve God and one another. The Lord our justice, we hear at the very end of the first reading from Jeremiah. We reconcile to one another, we hear in Ephesians. God is constantly calling us to have compassion. He's constantly calling us to reach out to someone who we may or may not agree with. He's calling us to reconcile with others and to be present in the moment. Maybe we're that silent resting place for someone for just a moment. And that allows them to be still and know that God is with them. Maybe we're called to do something more. It's not a call to just, I've got compassion, I'm not going to do anything else. But it's also not a call to have to fix everything for everybody. Compassion, it has passion in it, because we have passion for one another. When we allow the Lord God to illuminate our hearts, and we work with the Spirit working through us, in us, through us, out through the world, we begin to reach out and to care for others, to be in communion with others. Pope Francis has talked about for years now about he wants the people of God to smell like the sheep. He wants us to be with the people of God and to grow as the people of God with him and one another. And that's a challenge, but it's a calling. And it's a calling for us to take a chance on. And when we do that, we allow God to illuminate our hearts and our lives, and we are light for others. And as it says in the Gospel of John, very early on, the light has come into the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. However, we've got a lot of darkness and a lot of negativity throughout our world trying to bring us into a small spot, but we're being called to be light in those moments and to glorify God in our actions and our deeds to those we encounter. This last year was something that we all experienced, and we're starting to slowly emerge from it, but it's still something that we all experienced. And I saw people who were caring for others that normally may not have, and we all cared for others. And we had pity and we had compassion, because there were many people, through no fault of their own, that lost everything. And we're called to reach out and to glorify them and to glorify God by caring for them. And in doing so, we're having that compassion, and then we're glorifying God through our actions and deeds and by our lives. We're then having that justice and reconciliation that we're called to have.